that monster. Yeah. Look at that monster.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Out There JCH. On today's episode, I want to review the cost of what it took to go on my epic Lake Michigan fishing trip for my dad's 80th birthday. I'm going to break down the cost of renting a charter, the cost of lodging to stay overnight, and relate that to the amount of fish that we caught to get a dollars per pound cost of the fish that we were able to bring in, and compare that to buying the same species of fish from my local co-op. So for this trip, I ended up footing the bill for the entire cost of renting a charter, and my dad ended up paying for the hotel. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to break those total costs down to a per capita or per person basis so that we can make an easier comparison between store-bought fish or wild harvested fish. So our legacy charters charged us $750 for a full day's worth of fishing. We're at the dock at 6 a.m. and we're fishing until about 1:30 in the afternoon. Now this cost excludes tips, and what each of us contributed was about $20 per person. So the total cost of the charter was about $850, which again is not cheap, but considering we didn't have to navigate ourselves, we didn't have to deal with tangles, all of the gear was covered and paid for, and we didn't have to do any of the cleanup. $850 between 5 people is a pretty good price. So the next cost that we had was the overnight stay. And the reason why we got a hotel overnight was because Benton Harbor is on the other side of the state in which we live. So I thought it'd probably be better for us to spend the night rather than get up at 4 o'clock on the east side of Michigan and drive 2 hours early in the morning to the west side of Michigan. So that was an added cost. I don't know exactly how much my dad paid for the room, but let's call it $200 for a room that could sleep 5 adults. The last cost was the fuel of driving from one side of the state to the other. The round trip was about 250 miles. I'll just round to a full tank of gas, which ranged between $40 and $50. So if we add up the cost of the charter, the cost of tips, the cost of the room, and the cost of the fuel to drive back and forth, we're at about $1,000 for the entire trip. $1,000 breaks out to be about $200 per person. So not cheap, but not the most expensive thing.
In there. Let's go.
So the next question is, what does $200 get you on a fishing trip for Lake Michigan? Well, for us, we ended up catching 8 total fish. 2 of those fish were larger than the rest. I estimate that those 2 fish gave us about 20 pounds of fillets. The 6 remaining fish, I would estimate, gave us about 25 pounds of fillets. So a total of 45 pounds of fish. So 45 total pounds of fish split between 5 people equals 9 pounds of fish. So $200 for 9 pounds of fresh, wild-caught seafood. Lake food? Sea lake food. For 9 pounds of fish. And so that works out to be about $22 per pound. Not too bad. But how does that cost compare to the cost at our local co-op? So I recently went down to the co-op and looked at the fish stocks that they have. The cost of a coho salmon or a lake trout or any of the wild-caught fish in the Great Lakes at my co-op is between $25 and $30 per pound. So based on this fishing trip, it was actually cheaper for us to take a charter than it was to go down to the local co-op and buy the fish ourselves. About $3 per pound cheaper. But the cost savings isn't the only benefit to taking a trip like this. The primary benefit, as I mentioned before, was the fact that I got to take my dad on what turned out to be an epic fishing trip, one that we're never going to forget. And it's hard to put a price, or rather impossible to put a price on the memories that you build having these sorts of experiences. Experiences that we just couldn't get by going down to the supermarket and ordering fish from our fishmonger or pulling it out of the freezer. So if I were to estimate how much I would pay for the memories that we built on this trip, including being able to bring it to you all, I don't think I could put a price on it, but I'd easily pay double the $22 per pound that we ended up paying for this trip. So it's nice to be able to save money, and it's even nicer to save money while you're building quality lifetime memories. But it's not all benefit taking a charter out to catch your fish rather than going to the grocery store. And the primary trade-off between wild food harvesting and harvesting food at your supermarket is the fact that in order to harvest food from the wild or from nature, you have to spend a significant amount of time doing so. You also have to have some knowledge of how to process that catch or process the food that you're pulling from the environment. So I recognize that not everybody has a weekend and really 2 days to spend fishing, even if they're going to save $3 a pound doing so. The other drawback to wild harvesting is that you're not guaranteed to come home with anything. Anytime you go to the grocery store, even if it's grocery stores that are under-resourced, you're going to be able to find something to eat. And so one of the things that you're also paying for by acquiring your food from the supermarket is a reasonable expectation that there's going to be what you're looking for at the supermarket. On the other hand, if you have watched episode 1, you'll remember that we lost 4 Chinook salmon. 4 Chinook salmon is a significant amount of potential food that could have wound up in our freezer. If we estimate that each one of those 4 salmon weighed 10 pounds, which was roughly the size that Brandon caught, that's another 40 pounds of fillets that we could have added to our catch, which would have brought the cost per pound per person of this trip somewhere close to $10 a pound, which is less than half of what we could have paid for at the co-op. So on the one hand, the uncertainty of wild food harvesting and doing it yourself can be a drawback, but it can also be a windfall. But again, not everybody has access to the resources, both time and monetary and knowledge, that someone like me or my friends or my dad might have. So this isn't to knock anybody who is purchasing their food from the supermarket, but just to recognize that with the time resources and monetary resources that we have, if you haven't thought about harvesting more of your food from the wild, you might want to think about it. There's more than just one benefit. And the last thing I'll point out about wild food harvesting, it ties us closer to our relationships with food. The dominant cultures amongst our species have really struggled to establish healthy, sustainable relationships with our relatives and our environments. And I think one of the things that has alienated us from the ability to live in good relations is the fact that we are very disconnected from our food, both what it takes to acquire the food and what it takes to process and cook the food. So part of what I'm doing in trips like these, part of what my dad taught me, and hopefully what I'm doing here on this channel, is to reinforce a sense of relationship and to show you that it's not as difficult as it might seem, given the way that many of us have been socialized to think about where our food comes from and what it takes to put it on our plate. We are capable of better relations with the relatives that we eat in the environments that sustain us. And if we're able to, I encourage everyone to take just a little bit more time and a little bit more care to get out on the water and see what it takes to put that delicious food that's so convenient to buy at a grocery store on your plate. And I would also challenge those of us who are fortunate enough to have the time and money resources to encourage other people, to mentor other people, and to create space so that more of us can enjoy a closer relationship with our environments and the relatives that live in them. I'm really hoping to get into some steelhead fishing this winter so that I can, one, keep my freezer full of fish, but also to bring you some really interesting content. So let me know if you've gone steelhead fishing in Michigan and where might be some good spots to check out and hopefully bring in some fish for the winter. That's all I have for now. I'll see you next time on